You know, when we think about history, we usually imagine it as this really solid, unshakable foundation.
Oh, absolutely. Like a monument or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like looking at this majestic ancient monument, you see the massive stone pillars, the carved statues of heroes, the sweeping arcs of civilization, and you just kind of accept the narrative you're given.
Right, because it feels permanent. You just assume, well, this is how it was built.
Right. The stories we inherit, especially our foundational myths, they offer this, I don't know, this very comforting illusion.
They really do. We like our history to have, clear heroes, obvious villains, and just a grand, undeniable purpose.
But then, imagine you walk around the back of that monument. You push through some overgrown vines, you find a hidden door leading down into the dark, and suddenly you realize the whole thing is resting on hollow scaffolding.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Just layer upon layer of buried secrets.
Exactly. Fabricated ledgers, hidden documents. It's not a solid foundation at all.
The foundation isn't stone, it's carefully managed public relations.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so, what if the most famous monument of all, I mean, the foundational myth of Western civilization, the Trojan War, the Judgment of Paris, what if that entire story was a massive cover-up?
That is such a wild concept to think about.
Right. What if it was just this beautiful, sweeping romance designed specifically to hide a ruthless geopolitical resource war?
And that is the brilliant and frankly pretty unsettling premise we are exploring today.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
We are looking at this fascinating modern play titled The Apple of Empire, a political tragedy in 5 acts. It was published on the blog Plays and Philosophy by the writer Farid Novin. And what Novin does here is take everything you thought you knew about Greek mythology, and he strips away the magic entirely and forces you to look at the raw mechanics of power.
So in this deep dive, we aren't just recounting some old campfire story. We are going to unpack how this play reimagines the Greek gods.
Yeah, they aren't divine beings throwing lightning bolts around anymore.
No, not at all. They are a self-preserving ruling class. And the Trojan War is presented as basically the very first recorded regime change operation.
Which is just a mind-blowing way to look at it. Our mission today is to really look at the blueprints of that operation.
Yeah.
We're examining how empires manufacture consent, how resources drive conflict under the guise of honor, and how history itself is weaponized by the victors.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the way Novin opens the play, it immediately sets this dark, conspiratorial tone.
It really drops you right into it.
It does. We don't start on a shining mountaintop in Olympus. We start underground. You, as the listener, are taken down into this vast subterranean chamber beneath a ruined temple.
It's very cinematic.
Yeah, the air is thick with dust. It's filled with broken tablets, classified ledgers, and charred scrolls. And standing in the middle of this forgotten archive is a character simply called the archivist.
He's basically a whistleblower priest.
Exactly.
Someone who was supposed to just, maintain the official story, but stumbled onto the raw data instead.
And his opening monologue genuinely gave me chills. He looks at these forbidden records and says, I have the quote here, "History is not written by victors. It is licensed by institutions. What survives is rarely truth. It is edited memory, approved myth, state-sponsored remembrance."
Wow.
I know. He tells you right there that the poets who sang of Achilles and Hector didn't just lie, they were commissioned. The Trojan War wasn't fought for a woman. It wasn't fought for wounded honor.
So to understand what it was actually fought for, we have to kind of back up and re-examine the inciting incident, which is the Judgment of Paris.
Right, the golden apple.
Exactly. In the traditional myth, Paris, who is this mortal prince of Troy, is handed a golden apple and told to give it to the fairest goddess.
Right.
Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena all strip down, they offer him bribes, and he chooses Aphrodite because she promises him Helen of Sparta. It's essentially presented as this divine beauty pageant that just totally gets out of hand.
But in the Apple of Empire, the archivist uncovers minutes of the Olympian planning meetings.
The actual meeting notes.
Yeah, and that entire event is revealed to be a highly orchestrated ceremony of consent. Zeus, acting as this supreme autocrat, sets the whole thing up. He explicitly states, "The appearance of legitimacy is itself legitimacy."
And that line, that is really the cornerstone of the play's interpretation of state legitimacy theory.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So Zeus understands that absolute power is actually quite brittle if it relies solely on force. I mean, if the gods just dictate everything from on high, Mortals will eventually realize they are essentially slaves and they'll rebel.
Makes sense.
But if you give a mortal the illusion of a choice, if you let a human judge the divine femme de vie, you launder your authority through their participation.
Oh, wow. I'm picturing like an authoritarian regime holding a heavily publicized, supposedly democratic election.
Yes, that's exactly
They
it.
carefully select the candidates, they control the media, and they just need the citizens to cast a ballot so the regime can say, look, you chose this.
Precisely. So the three goddesses make their pitches to Paris, but they aren't pitching beauty, they're pitching systems of governance.
That is so wild. Okay, so Hera goes first, right?
Yeah, Hera offers dynastic legitimacy. She essentially argues for a strict, top-down empire. She notes that mortals are useful because their ignorance legitimizes outcomes.
Wow, just completely cynical.
Totally. As long as the people believe the bloodline is sacred, they won't question the taxes.
Then you have Aphrodite. She pitches what the play calls the emotional economy.
Right.
She offers desire, spectacle, and emotional manipulation. She argues that desire governs civilizations more effectively than armies.
And this raises a really important question, Why does the ruling class prefer a populace driven by emotion rather than logic?
Because they're easier to control.
Exactly, because an emotional populace is predictable. If people are entirely consumed by their personal desires, by romance, by outrage, or by, endless spectacle, they aren't paying attention to the structural inequalities of the state.
They just police themselves.
Exactly. The gods fully expect Paris to choose Aphrodite or Hera because both choices validate their system of control. Greed or lust, either one keeps the mortal world submissive.
But then Athena steps up, and she doesn't offer spectacle. She offers wisdom, the capacity to govern justly, the sheer cold discipline to distinguish truth from manipulation.
It's a completely different paradigm.
It is. She warns Paris that civilizations founded upon reason outlive those founded upon appetite. And here is the massive twist that the archivist finds buried in those charred scrolls. Paris actually chooses Athena.
Right. He hands the golden apple to the goddess of wisdom. He concludes that conquest without justice becomes tyranny, and beauty without truth becomes manipulation.
And Olympus absolutely loses its mind. The sky blackens, panic ensues. But wait, I'm struggling with this a bit.
What part?
Well, if the gods have all the power, if they control the weather, the resources, the armies, why do they care what one single mortal thinks about their legitimacy? Why does an honest choice from Paris threaten them so deeply?
Because it exposes the fragility of their ideological monopoly.
Okay.
We connect this to the bigger picture. If Athena's doctrine of reason and distributed governance is publicly affirmed by a mortal, the aristocracies of Greece will start rewarding merit over bloodline. The dynastic systems Hera relies on will fracture.
Oh, I see. If people start applying logic to the divine hierarchy, they're going to realize gods aren't even necessary. They're just parasites.
Exactly. Aphrodite even points out that the emotional economy will collapse. If Paris rejects desire for reason, it means humanity is capable of outgrowing the need for the gods' manipulations.
Wow.
Unchecked reason is the one thing a tyrannical system cannot survive, because reason inevitably asks, why are you in charge?
Right. But, ideological panic doesn't usually mobilize a military invasion all on its own. A philosophical debate is just a smokescreen. You don't launch 1,000 ships just because a prince had a good thought.
Right, there's always a material motivation.
Which means we have to look past the ideology and find the material reality, the cold, hard economic trigger for the war.
And that introduces us to Poseidon.
The ocean guy.
Yeah, but in Novin's reimagining, Poseidon isn't just splashing around with a trident. He is the architect of maritime empire. He is this ruthless, cold-blooded geopolitical strategist.
That is such a cool take on him.
It really is. While Zeus and Apollo are having an ideological meltdown over Paris, choosing Athena, Poseidon walks into the war room, pulls down a map of Mediterranean trade routes, and points out the actual existential threat.
Ambrosia.
Yes.
The magical food that supposedly makes the gods immortal. But the play strips away the magic completely. Ambrosia is treated like crude oil, or like a rare earth mineral.
It is the ultimate strategic commodity. Poseidon explains the mechanics of their supremacy. Olympus maintains its divine authority strictly because it controls the processing and distribution of ambrosia.
But Poseidon reveals that Troy hasn't just found a new supply. They've discovered new preservation methods for ambrosia. They have native technological supremacy now.
Right, and this is a textbook application of what economists call resource curse theory, but flipped on its head.
Yeah.
Usually, a resource-rich nation is exploited. Here, Troy is a threat, because they're about to become completely self-sufficient. Poseidon lays it out. If Troy can preserve and distribute ambrosia freely, Olympus loses its monopoly.
Divinity itself becomes decentralized.
Exactly. Mortals will no longer need to sacrifice to the gods if they can manufacture the divine sustenance themselves.
This would be like, okay, imagine a small, independent island nation suddenly inventing a way to manufacture the world's most advanced quantum semiconductors out of seawater.
That's a great analogy.
The global tech superpowers wouldn't applaud the innovation. They would panic because their entire leverage over the global economy would vanish overnight. Poseidon literally says history is not governed by ethics. It is governed by logistics. Armies march on grain. Empires rise on shipping lanes.
So for Poseidon, going to war with Troy isn't a tragedy, it's a logistical necessity. It's incredibly convenient, actually. But he also understands the public relations aspect. You cannot just declare war on a flourishing, independent city simply because they invented better preservation technology.
Right. Because if the semiconductor cartel just bombs the island nation, the rest of the world revolts. It exposes the cartel's greed. But wait, if Poseidon just needs to destroy their ambrosia facilities, why go through the incredibly convoluted drama of Helen of Troy?
Right, why the huge story?
Yeah, why abduct a queen? Why not just orchestrate a border skirmish? Or frame Troy for a naval attack?
Because a border skirmish justifies a short war. A short war means targeted strikes, which leaves Troy's infrastructure mostly intact and invites international investigation.
Ah, I see.
Poseidon knows they need to completely level the city, eradicate the technology, and salt the earth. A long, devastating, total war requires a deeply emotional, unassailable narrative.
Because the public won't accept a 10-year siege over supply chain.
Exactly. They will only accept it if they believe their fundamental honor and morality have been violated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you can't just wish a narrative into existence. You have to manufacture it. And that brings us to Apollo.
Yes. In the traditional myths, Apollo is the god of poetry, light, and truth. In this play, he is the divine enforcer of ideological orthodoxy. He is basically the head of the Ministry of Truth.
It is a chilling scene. Apollo calls a myth strategy session with his scribes. He decrees that reality is now scheduled for revision.
Scheduled for revision, yeah.
He dictates the new official narrative. Paris did not choose Athena. Paris chose Aphrodite. Aphrodite rewarded him with Helen. Helen was abducted. Greek honor was violated. Therefore, a holy war is morally necessary.
And one of the scribes, entirely confused, asks about the ambrosia reserves. Apollo calmly says, removed entirely. The scribe asks about Athena's selection. Apollo says, erased.
It's so dystopia.
It really is.
Yeah.
And when the scribe protests that these are the official archives, Apollo delivers the most defining line of the play.
History is not an archive. It is infrastructure.
History's infrastructure.
Yeah.
That is heavy. He's saying that the past doesn't exist to be studied. It exists to support the weight of the current empire. If a fact doesn't bear the load of the state's agenda, you just demolish it. What's fascinating here is how Novin explores the concept of constructivism and narrative formation. Society is governed through symbols and emotional framing.
Right.
Apollo understands that truth without narrative discipline produces instability. But creating that narrative requires absolute compliance.
And Paris doesn't want to comply. He refuses to accept this fake reality.
Yeah.
So Apollo, this god of poetry, physically assaults him. He uses divine force to literally beat Paris into submission.
Yeah, it's brutal.
But honestly, I look at that scene and think, isn't that a massive failure? If Apollo has to resort to breaking a mortal's jaw to enforce his propaganda, doesn't that prove their divine order is actually incredibly fragile?
You've hit on the exact paradox of absolute power. Yes, it is incredibly fragile. Coercion is the last resort when narrative fails.
Okay.
But Apollo knows that while force creates the initial compliance, the myth will sustain that compliance across generations. While he is standing over a bleeding Paris, he whispers the darkest truth of the whole play. Civilization survives because populations prefer myth to complexity.
Populations prefer myth to complexity. Wow. And the devastating human cost of that preference is embodied by Cassandra.
Oh, absolutely.
The Trojan prophetess cursed to know the truth but never be believed. She is wandering the streets of Troy at night, watching the citizens celebrate, and she is screaming, "The war has already been approved before the first ship sails. Helen will become propaganda. Honor will become propaganda. Destiny will become propaganda."
It is a brutal depiction of what political scientists call manufacturing consent. Helen, a real human being, is stripped of her agency and transformed into a political symbol, a mythic object of desire entirely to mobilize the Greek population for a geopolitical resource grab.
And the most tragic part, the chorus, who represent the scribes, the everyday soldiers, the merchants, they hear Cassandra. They know on some level that she might be right, but they actively choose not to listen.
Yeah, it's easier that way.
They tell her, "We prefer stories where heroes choose battles freely. Systems are harder to mourn."
Because mourning a system means you have to actually dismantle it. Mourning a hero just requires a statue and a song. It demands nothing of you politically.
Man. So with the narrative successfully deployed, the actual war begins. The Greek ships land. The siege starts. But Novin doesn't focus on the battlefield heroism. He takes us deep beneath Olympus to Hephaestus's forge.
Right.
And it doesn't look like a mythical blacksmith shop. It looks like a massive, sprawling industrial complex. Mechanical hammers, roaring furnaces, endless assembly lines.
This is where the play explores the military-industrial complex theory. Athena, who is horrified by the scale of the slaughter, confronts Hephaestus. She points at the mountains of weapons and says, "You forged shields once to defend cities. Now you manufacture catastrophe."
And Hephaestus's reply is so cynical, yet so undeniably accurate to the world they've built. He doesn't even look up from his anvil. He just says, "No, I manufacture dependency. That is more profitable."
He explains the grim economic reality of their empire. Peace actually threatens industries. Peace destabilizes established hierarchies and eliminates the need for emergency powers.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. He essentially tells Athena that once you build a machine this large, the state becomes captive to its own military infrastructure. Ultimately, people no longer exist to be protected by systems. People exist to sustain the systems.
Poseidon completely backs this up in a strategic briefing with the Olympian generals.
Yeah.
They ask him when they can wrap up the war, and he says he doesn't want to win quickly.
Right. A short war isn't the goal.
No.
Yeah.
A prolonged, decade-long conflict is the goal. It normalizes domestic surveillance back in Greece. It justifies permanent emergency governance, and it thoroughly destroys rival trade networks.
Poseidon outlines the perfect imperial strategy. You use the state of emergency to consolidate your own authority while bleeding your economic rivals dry. Troy isn't just an enemy anymore. It's a necessary example to any other city-state that might think about managing its own resources.
But I keep coming back to Athena. She is a major goddess. She literally represents wisdom and strategic warfare. She sees the ambrosia cover-up. She sees the military-industrial complex spinning out of control. She stands next to Poseidon as Troy is literally burning to the ground below them, furious that millions are dying just to preserve administrative efficiency. Why can't she stop it? If anyone can pull the emergency brake on this train, shouldn't it be her?
Well, this brings us to the profound mechanism of tragic structuralism.
Okay.
The author's notes define this beautifully. Tragic structuralism means that bureaucracies outlive and overpower their creators. The emergency brake just doesn't exist. Even a powerful deity like Athena may recognize the truth, but she is completely powerless against the momentum of overlapping institutional factions.
So the gods aren't a unified moral authority at all.
Not even close. They're competing corporate departments. Apollo controls the media, Poseidon controls logistics, Hephaestus controls manufacturing. Once the machine of war is turned on, it demands fuel. Empire prioritizes its own continuity over everything, including the conscience of its own leaders.
And the fuel for that machine is the city of Troy. The depiction of the fall of Troy in this play strips away every ounce of romance we usually associate with this myth.
It really does.
The chorus emerges through the firelight and smoke, walking among the rubble. They chant. They said it was for love. But grain burned, ports burned, libraries burned, trade routes shifted, empires expanded.
It reduces the grand mythology down to its absolute economic bones.
Yeah, and then they deliver this haunting line. The poets will sing of heroes, but accountants financed the war. The priests blessed it. The merchants supplied it. They weren't killed for Helen, they were killed for monopolies.
This culminates in the final moments of Paris. He is lying mortally wounded in the ashes of the city she tried to save. He didn't die in a glorious duel. He is just another casualty of a systemic purge.
His final monologue is devastating. He looks up at the ruined sky and says, "I chose wisdom. And history punished me for it, not because wisdom was wrong, but because systems built upon domination cannot survive honest judgment."
He finally understands the trap. He realizes the golden apple was never a prize. It was a strategic stress test.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He foolishly thought power sought truth. Now, bleeding out in the ashes, he understands that power only seeks continuity. A civilization built on lies will eagerly destroy an entire world just to avoid confronting its own reflection.
He speaks his last words softly into the smoke. Troy did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it became inconvenient.
It is a breathtaking political tragedy. When you synthesize all the theories Farid Novin presents, the illegitimacy theory, the resource curse, constructivism, he is ultimately defining mythology itself as a political technology.
Right.
It is the precise mechanism through which power disguises itself as destiny. By taking a brutal logistical resource war and packaging it as a romantic epic about a kidnapped queen, the ruling class ensured that future generations would look back and see divine will, rather than supply chain monopolies and manufactured consent.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener? I mean, it is so easy to listen to an analysis of a play like this and think, wow, what a clever, cynical take on an old Greek story. But the relevance is incredibly immediate. When you were doom-scrolling the news today, when you were reading the headlines about the latest international conflict or a sudden market crisis or a diplomatic breakdown, you have to ask yourself, are you being fed a romantic myth about heroes and honor and inevitable destinies? Or are there geopolitical shipping lanes, semiconductor monopolies, and strategic ambrosia reserves being intentionally obscured by a really good public relations campaign?
It challenges you to ask, are you looking at the monument, or are you brave enough to look at the scaffolding? Because as Apollo noted, it is so much easier for a population to accept a compelling emotional story than to mourn a complex, broken system that they are complicit in.
Exactly, and that leaves us with one final lingering thought. In the epilogue of the play, we return to the whistleblower. The archivist is standing in that collapsing subterranean library as the dust settles around him. He looks at the real records one last time and says, "The judgment of Paris was not a contest between goddesses. It was the first recorded regime change operation, and perhaps only the beginning." If the archivist is right, and populations genuinely do prefer comforting narratives to the harsh realities of political economy, what uncomfortable truths are sitting in the dark, dusty archives of our own modern history right now, simply because we, as a society, are too afraid to let them out into the light?